So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so I want to start off by posing this question to the group, and hopefully we can see some answers here in the chat window. So what is sustainability? Anyone can go ahead and answer in that chat box or raise their hand. If not, I'm going to give you the answer. All right, so the most common definition that we use is meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Typically, when people think of sustainability, they often think of the environmental component of sustainability, but there's also two other components. There's a social and economic, and nothing can truly be sustainable without meeting each of these, being socially, oh, where'd my cursor go here? Sorry. Socially equitable, environmentally regenerative, and economically feasible. So all three of these need to be met for it to be a truly sustainable system. All right, so I wanted to go through a few of the plans and goals and kind of how we track progress as a campus. So the three plans we're going to cover today is our sustainability plan, our climate action plan, and our zero waste plan. The zero waste plan being the newest one we just launched this past year. And each one of these, there's many groups of folks working behind the scenes to make these plans happen. Our sustainability plan was created in 2013, and it's a 10-year plan, so it brings us through 2023. We're now somehow 3 years away from that. So we're in the talks right now of updating that. Our climate action plan, we'll get into more details later, but essentially it's a goal for us to become climate neutral by 2040. Climate neutrality means zero greenhouse gas emissions coming from the campus. And our zero waste plan sets a goal for us to have a 95% diversion rate by 2025. For the folks that aren't familiar with that term, diversion rate means essentially diverting materials away from landfills. So if we had 100 pounds of material leaving the campus, 95% of it, or 95 pounds, would have to be diverted from the landfill, which is either recycling, composted, donated, or reused. And then a little bit more on the progress reporting piece. So there's, hopefully you've heard of AC STARS by now. It's a self-reporting system survey, essentially, that campuses can elect to do. And this survey is now global. It used to be just nationwide, but now there's campuses from all over the world that are taking part in it. And it ranks you on your campus sustainability efforts, everything from academic courses to utility consumption, through investments that the university has. So it's a real holistic approach to evaluating sustainability at the campus level. We're currently ranked number 1 in the CSU. We're a STARS Gold campus. So that's the second highest ranking in that system. So we're pretty proud of that. I'll talk a little bit more about the greenhouse gas inventory when we get to the climate action plan. All right. So moving along here, I thought it would be good for us to explain a little bit about the different sustainability groups on campus, the folks that are really driving a lot of these initiatives. So there's really 3 groups. We have my group, which is the energy and sustainability team, which lives within facilities planning, design, and construction. And we focus on energy efficiency, water conservation, infrastructure upgrades, and a slew of other things. We have the Institute for Sustainability. Most folks are aware of that department. They primarily focus on volunteer opportunities, grants and research, student projects, and faculty engagement. And then the third arm of our sustainability team here at CSUN is our associated students. They run a few programs through their department. One is our Sustainable Office program. If you have not heard of it, or if your department hasn't done it yet, I highly recommend it. They also have the Recycle Listserv, which essentially is a large reuse program. So anything that people don't have a use for anymore, they can collect it and then redistribute it on campus. And then they also handle some of our recyclables still, primarily cardboard at this point. And you can kind of see the intersection of each one of those circles, essentially saying that each one of these groups works together on implementing our campus sustainability plans, which are with our own kind of unique roles. All right, so a little bit more on our sustainability plan. I mentioned our plan has 10 sections. These are the sections in bold: education, energy and buildings, waste and materials management, purchasing, administration, dining, organics, transportation, environmental quality, and water. Each one of these sections has quite a few projects and programs within it. These are just kind of a snapshot of a few more current ones. Is there any particular one anyone would like me to talk to, or an area of interest, and I can focus more on there? Let me know. You can type it into the chat window or raise your hand. If not, I will talk about whichever ones pop out to me. All right. I'm seeing a comment on energy and buildings. So energy and buildings, that one sits kind of within my my group's area. A lot of the work that we're doing here has to do with equipment replacements or upgrades, which you'll see an example of later. We have a big project we're launching right now on LED lighting retrofits. We have a campus-wide plan for this, starting with the Oviatt Library and then moving around the campus, tackling a building at a time. We're expecting a pretty significant monetary savings as well as reduction in greenhouse gas emissions from that project. We have our first net zero energy building, which was the first on our campus as well as in the CSU. This is our sustainability center. If you have not been to that building, I highly suggested they do tours frequently. Obviously not right now, but when we all get back to campus life, feel free to stop by. On-site renewables, we are working on, and we have been working on getting more solar on campus. We only have about 1 to 2% of our total annual consumption is generated by on-site solar. Not nearly where we would like to be, especially with our climate neutrality goal. I can speak more to that if anyone has any specific questions, but know that it is something that we are working on, and we've been challenged by quite a few things. I see a comment about dining. Dining's an interesting one. So a year or two ago, we transitioned, working with CSUN Dining, all of their single-use items to compostable containers and utensils, which at the time was a great thing and something that, we were kind of considered leaders for doing. Times have changed, and this compostable container material is no longer accepted at our at the composting facility where we send the material to. So unfortunately, all of those materials are now being sent to the landfill. So kind of the key takeaway there is reusables are always better than anything that the markets can create for single-use items. The Freudian Sips around campus offer discounts for reusable cups, so keep that in mind next time you're on campus. And they have been working on integrating more plant-based meals into the various locations. Any other areas of interest? If not, I'll pick one more area and talk about that. All right, water. So water was a really big focus for our department for a while during the biggest drought our state has seen in a long time, which was a couple of years back. Kind of ironic to say that on days when it's raining, but we are in Southern California and water is a valuable resource. Most of our water is imported from far, far away. And with that in mind and the scarcity of water, trying to reduce it as much as we can is always a goal. We've removed close to 400,000 square feet of turf grass from across campus and replaced it with drought-tolerant native landscaping, which is also pollinator-friendly habitats. We are currently working on upgrading our water meter infrastructure. Our Colleen Barzay, our energy manager, is working on this. Hydrogel injections, that one's usually one that someone has a question about. So what that is essentially think of it like a liquid sponge that we inject underneath the grass, and it absorbs and releases water as the plants need it. We've done, I think, 5 or 6 locations of this, and we've seen consistently between 50 and 70% reduction in irrigation needs. So that was a huge help during the drought and continues to be. All right. So I think if there's any other ones I want to touch on here, yeah, we'll go ahead and continue. All right, so our climate action plan, I mentioned before that the goal here is to be a carbon neutral campus by 2040. And what that means is 0 greenhouse gas emissions coming from the campus by that date. So just to kind of bring everyone up to speed, making sure we're understanding this section of the talk. There's 3 scopes of emissions that we account for. Scope 1 is direct emissions. Scope 2 is indirect emissions. And scope 3 is other indirect emissions. Each one of these categories is made up by slightly different things, all of which have emissions. The emissions they have are not necessarily different. We bucket them into these categories to be able to account for them and kind of work towards the goal. Scope 1 is primarily made up of on-site emissions, which for us is primarily burning of natural gas, as well as fueling our campus fleet vehicles. Scope 2 is, for us again, is primarily purchased electricity. So the electricity that we purchase from our local utility, which is LADWP. And then scope 3 for us is business travel, as well as commuting. And we'll dive into those a little bit more. All right, so a couple questions for the group. Feel free to type into that chat window. What is CSUN's largest scope of emissions? And I'll flash back so you can see what those scopes are again in case you have a question on which one. So which one of these 3 would be our largest scope at CSUN? All right, so I see a few 3s. So scope 3 is our single largest contributor to our campus greenhouse gas emissions. This is primarily due to our large population, also lack of public transportation compared to other larger cities, and people being or choosing single occupant vehicles as their more common method of transportation. So next question here. So what are some ways to reduce scope 2 emissions? Feel free to type in that chat window again. All right, seeing a couple answers trickle in. So the answer here is solar. Remember that scope 2 is primarily purchased electricity from our utility company. So by putting on-site solar, we're reducing the amount of electricity purchased from the utility company. Also, solar is an emissions-free source of electricity. All right, so I wanted to jump into our historical emissions to kind of give you folks an idea of what that looks like for our campus. Let me let this load here. This is our Second Nature reporting platform. Second Nature is the entity that our campus signed our climate commitment with. We report on an annual basis our total greenhouse gas emissions broken up by scope. Nikhil actually just completed our 2019, which is this last bullet over here, 2019 greenhouse gas emissions report. The good news here is if you look at the purple line here is our net emissions, so it's scopes 1, 2, and 3 combined. Our baseline for metric purposes is 1990. And then we're currently, obviously, the year we just reported in was 2019. Our overall trend is going downwards, which is obviously where we want to be. We're looking at a total of 65,000 metric tons of ECO2 compared to our baseline year of 102. And you can kind of see that the total breakup of the different emission scopes here. Scope 1 is always, for us, probably going to be the lowest. You see scope 2 coming in second, and then scope 3 is up here. Any questions on here?
Austin, will you explain what ECO2 is, or CO2e?
Yeah, so CO2e, there's different, essentially there's different emission types. CO2 is one of them. There's also methane and a few others. So what CO2 is they take the greenhouse gas heating equivalent of each of those emission types and they convert it into CO2e. So we're able to look at one emissions type rather than the 3 or 4 that exist. All right, so moving on, I think the scope 1 emissions, we're going to do a dive into each emissions type, and then I'll show you some of the projects and programs that we've been working on. So in scope 1, this again makes up only 10% of our total emissions. This is 2018 data, mostly because 2019 was just done about an hour ago. But it stays relatively consistent between 18 and 19. So on-site emissions, right, I had mentioned natural gas. That's the larger contributor to our scope 1 emissions, coming in at 8,700 metric tons. We use natural gas on campus for our boilers and package units. Our boilers are for heating water that we pump around campus for heating buildings. We also use it in, we have some water heaters, natural gas fired water heaters on campus. Package units is also heating and air conditioning related, so natural gas being consumed to heat our buildings. Fleet fuels, so we have some gasoline, diesel, and propane powered vehicles as well as equipment. We'll touch on that a little bit more. And then refrigerants on the bottom left there, that is again related to heating and cooling our buildings. making up only about 1,000 metric tons. So here are some of the strategies for Scope 1 emissions. One of probably the more visual projects we've had has been our grounds equipment replacement. So historically, our grounds team has used gas-powered blowers and weed whackers. Maybe 3 years ago, we worked with the ground shop on replacing all of these with an electric battery-powered equivalent piece of equipment. And they have been using those since. Not a huge impact from a greenhouse gas standpoint, but a really good project for people kind of seeing what our goals are, as well as kind of a healthier tool for our grounds folks to be using. If you've been on campus for several years now, you've probably seen our streets being torn up. This was part of the heating hot water pipe replacement. So I mentioned on the previous slide the boilers that heat water that we pump around campus. That water is traveling through pipes. That pipe was leaking in several locations, so we needed to do a pipe replacement. By replacing that pipe, we're eliminating those leaks, which should allow us to reduce our natural gas consumption for heating that water. Scope 2 emissions, these make up about 27% of our total emissions. Another question for the group, if you want to go ahead and type into that chat window, how do you think electricity is typically used in a campus building? The categories, I'll give you kind of a hint here. So we have lighting, plug loads, and HVAC. So which one of those is the highest consumer of electricity in our buildings? Again, the categories being lighting, plug loads, and HVAC. Okay, seeing a couple answers coming in for HVAC and one for lighting. I'll be honest, when I first saw this graph, I was a little shocked too, because I also thought HVAC was going to be the higher consumer in our buildings. But on average, our building lighting is actually consuming more electricity than any of the other two categories. Obviously, that's different in some buildings, but on average, that's pretty standard for us. Which is also why we're tackling lighting as a campus-wide project, and hopefully able to kind of shift that pie chart around. This graph or image that you see on the right there was hand-drawn by Nikhil on our team to demonstrate how water is moved around campus. So our central plant, which is up here just southwest of Art and Design Center, this is where our water is heated and chilled. We also have a satellite plant, which is down over here. And our heating hot water is pumped around campus through these various pipes and fed into each building through these blue lines here. All right, so what are some of the initiatives that we're doing to reduce our Scope 2 emissions? I mentioned the lighting efficiency project already. The picture on the right you see there is a picture of an old air handling unit and a new one. This is a really good example of energy efficiency. While we don't typically replace these large units unless they're failing or in need of replacement, because the cost to do so is expensive. Very expensive. But this graph is a good example just to show you by replacing an old piece of equipment with a new piece of equipment, what the savings looks like. That blue line on the top there is it was our existing piece of equipment. The challenge with that piece of equipment was that it was a constant volume, meaning we couldn't ramp it up or down based on our need. If there was only one office occupied in the building, we needed to turn the air handler on. We would turn it on and we got the full thing or nothing. With our new units, we're able to ramp it up and down based on our usage or based on our need. So there is some savings to be had there. For new construction, our standard is LEED Gold. LEED stands for Leadership in Energy Efficient, or Energy and Environmental Design. Gold is their middle category, so all of our new buildings will be at least LEED Gold. We do have one LEED Platinum building on campus, which is that sustainability center I had mentioned a little earlier. In addition to LEED Gold, we've changed that standard to now include an EY, which is our energy use intensity. So by lowering our energy use intensity, or having a lower energy use intensity and building a LEED Gold building, we should be able to drive our Scope 2 down. So future projects, that's the section in the gray right there. Those are some of the projects we're looking at. So energy storage, so that's more likely to be battery storage. And then addition of other renewables, primarily going to be solar. All right, so commuting Scope 3 emissions. These make up 63% of our total emissions. This is primarily commuting. If you look at the numbers there, so 42,000 metric tons comes from commuting. This is for faculty, staff, and students. And then the other chunk there comes from university funded travel. So we do calculate all the emissions from the flights that folks take to attend conferences, or the vehicle miles traveled for attending conferences and meetings. The graph, or the image on the left there, that shows you the locations people are commuting from and how they relate to the campus. So that red dot in the middle is the campus. Each ring is 5 miles away from the campus, growing by 5 miles. So this is a 5 mile radius, 10, 15, 20, 25. And this came from a study I believe the Institute did as part of our transportation survey. We just received the new data on that, and Nikhil touched on that in his talk last week. We can share the link for the dashboard that was created if you're interested in seeing more information on that. Some of the initiatives we're working on in Scope 3 is expanding bicycle infrastructure. So bicycle is an emissions-free method of traveling. So if we can provide better infrastructure and services for the folks that are biking, hopefully we can shift some of the population to bicycles versus single occupant vehicles. We do believe that this is possible because there's a large population of the campus that commutes that lives within 5 miles, which is a very bikeable distance. We are also working with the different public transit services on offering programs to the university and the students. Additionally, we have expanded our EV charging. So if you drive an electric vehicle, while the emissions aren't zero because you're having to plug it in, unless your house or wherever you're plugging in is solar powered, you're soaking it up from the grid. That grid is mixed with some renewables, but also some natural gas and potentially some coal-powered sources. Still better than driving a fossil fuel-powered car. But we have expanded our EV charging infrastructure to kind of promote people driving those EVs. We currently have about 30 chargers on campus, and with the new structure that should be online sometime in the next several months, there'll be an additional 100 chargers. So a big jump for us there. All right, so zero waste. This is our newest plan for the campus, and one we've been focused on pretty significantly over the last year. I have some more questions here. So up to 12 million metric tons of plastic ends up in the blank each year. Please type in the chat box if you have an idea of what that might be. All right, everyone seems to know the answer to this one. Ocean, you are correct. So what percent of all plastic products are recycled? Seeing 5, 10, 7. Unfortunately, you guys are all really close. Only 9% of all plastic products are actually recycled. So even though they are recyclable, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're being recycled. That could have to do with the lack of markets for those materials, or just landing in the wrong bin and going to the landfill or elsewhere. All right, so what percent of food grown, processed, and transported in the U.S. will never be consumed, meaning it will go to the landfill? All right, so you both are very close. So the number there is between 24 and 40%. Kind of a large range, but it is it's probably a pretty hard number to calculate. I know for our campus, it's kind of always changing. All right, so moving along here, I'm only going to touch on this slide briefly just to give a little background. So our plan was developed by kind of gathering the operational folks throughout the campus, which are listed up there: Energy and Sustainability Institute for Sustainability and so on. And kind of looking at our current practices, figuring out where we knew we could make improvements, going out to other industries, figuring out what their best practices were, and really adopting some of those and kind of massaging them to fit our campus. There's several folks out there leading the way in zero waste. I know San Francisco Airport was one of the folks we had looked to. If you've traveled through that airport, you've probably noticed their waste bins because they're pretty unique. So anyway, we gathered a bunch of best practices and shuffled them into these areas of focus: general strategies, buildings, grounds, programs and processes, events and services, policies, and recommended practices. There's probably between 10 and 20 different strategies in each one of those sections, which I'll show you a sample of what those look like. Here are some of those strategies. I'll just talk to the ones that are in the yellow gold color. Unless you have questions on any other ones, let me know and I can talk to them. So expanding pre and post consumer composting. So in the last, let's call it 4 months, our team has worked to put out 3 stream bins across campus. These bins include a section for commingled recycling, landfill material, as well as organics or food waste. This new food waste bin is to tackle this point here. About 30% of our total campus landfill material is actually food waste and could be composted and diverted away from landfill. So that is a point where we know we could make a big impact by simply giving folks the opportunity to put material in the right bin. Removing waste receptacles from classrooms. So we did a pilot on a couple buildings, Chaparral Hall as well as Sierra Hall, by removing trash bins and locating them centrally in corridors. This one had primarily to do with two things, right? So reducing the total amount of bins that are being serviced on a daily basis, which every bin that's serviced gets a new liner, so it's plastic that's used every time. But also streamlining our waste collection, right? We don't really need to have that many bins in each classroom. I think in Sierra Hall, one of our classrooms had 4 or 5 desk side bins in it. So there's just not a real good system that was being used. So this is the strategy that we ended up rolling out throughout the campus over the last several months. Expanding reusable serviceware at CSUN Dining. Again, going back to that plastic stat, right? Reusable is always better than recyclable or even compostable. So how do we start integrating this into our CSUN Dining operations? I know they're starting to sell reusable silverware sets and cups and mugs and things like that. So if you haven't seen those, there's options there for you. Increasing drinking water refill stations. So this one might seem like a water project, but it's actually a waste project. Our campus buys a ton of water bottles every year, so hopefully by providing people the option to refill their bottles, they'll start bringing their own rather than buying a plastic single-use bottle. Last one I'll touch on there is the composting all campus yard debris. So if you're not aware, we do all of our green waste, which is leaves, branches, twigs, some grass, and other green waste is processed on site. This is done up between baseball and softball. We call it the PILE, which stands for Proactively Integrating Landscape Ecology. It's a pretty cool facility. We're one of a few CSUs doing all of their green waste processing on site. We actually had our first compost spreading from the PILE a few weeks before we were all remotely working. And that was done in front of the Sustainability Center. All right, so this is a visual of our zero waste plan. Each one of these chunks represents a different waste stream, and obviously going down over time. The landfill is that black section on the bottom there. That's going to go to nearly zero at 2025. With our goal being 95% diversion from landfill. Recycling and food waste composting both increasing over time. Some of the strategies to remind you were the different bin sets that we've just deployed across the campus, the zero waste bins. Our reuse program, increasing slightly over time. One of the programs that the ES sustainability folks are operating is helping with that. Green waste isn't really going to grow over time. We're just going to continue doing what we're doing. We're capturing all of it right now, so there's no real room for growth. Paper towel diversion is the next chunk up, the solid gray section. We spend about $100,000 a year on paper towels, which is amazing and sad at the same time. And this is a source that could easily be eliminated and by moving the campus over to hand dryers, which is something that we'll likely be doing in the future. And then the next item up is source reduction. So this is buying less things that end up in our landfill stream. So this has to do with looking at how products are packaged, if the products we're buying are even recyclable or compostable or divertible from landfill. Yeah. All right, so the reason this is so complicated, and we wanted to set a goal and develop a plan around it, is because it's a much larger problem than people think. Our campus generates 4.25 pounds of trash per minute, each and every day, 365, 24/7. So that's a pretty amazing stat to wrap your head around. Another challenge we have is lacking of infrastructure. While we have deployed all the new zero waste bins across campus, there still is infrastructure that's needed, not only necessarily on campus, but also our hauler, our waste hauler, do they have the proper facilities to sort the material that we send? Or can the composting facility accept this material or that material? So there's definitely an infrastructure challenge. Education is probably the biggest challenge. Waste is probably the only utility that we don't have direct control over, right? So we can, for example, with lighting, we could put in lighting controls and upgrade our lighting and reduce our total electricity consumption. But with waste, it's really hard. It's very dependent on our campus community and whether they make the right choice and what they're buying or even how they're disposing of it. So education is key, making sure people are familiar with the bins and how they should be disposing of things, as well as what their products are made of. Another big challenge is volatile markets. I actually just got a note from our waste hauler on Monday saying that due to COVID-19, a lot of the sorting activities have slowed down and have halted, meaning materials that we send them, they're unable to sort because they can't, their workers can't stand that close to each other and sort due to social distancing guidance from CDC. Additionally, markets that we're not allowed to ship our materials overseas anymore, and it's becoming harder and harder to find homes for these types of materials. And then inconsistent messages. This is kind of falls under the education category as well, but making sure people are familiar with what should go where, making sure products are labeled correctly, and things like that. So with that, that kind of wraps up everything I had planned to talk about. If there's any questions, feel free to type in the chat window or raise your hand. If I didn't cover anything that you wanted me to cover, please ask a question and I'll do my best to answer it.
Hey, Austin, it's Paul Chance. I have a question.
Yep.
At what point do we actually apply pressure to some of the vendors who are producing this content?
Yeah.
And with that, I mean, specifically, you know, like things that are difficult to recycle, or it's hard for, I mean, getting everybody as individuals to make the right decision is pretty hard, but if, you know, if the decision is not in their hands in the first place, like if those materials simply aren't used, or, you know, like all plastic, I'm not articulating my thought very well, but maybe you're getting my point.
Yeah, no, I understand it. And this is actually something that the waste industry as a whole is kind of upset about. And a lot of the haulers are burdened with having to figure out what to do with this material, right? So you have, we'll call Target, right? So Target makes a bunch of products, or they have products developed for them, right? And this packaging says it's plastic number 5. And if our hauler, the industry as a whole, is not able to process plastic number 5, so they're saying their product is recyclable, but it isn't, because the markets aren't there, or the facilities, or whatever it is. It's in reality, it's not recyclable. It becomes a big problem. There's been several news articles out there lately because a lot of recyclable material is going to landfill right now because those markets just aren't there. And I think it's starting to gain a lot more attention. I know, at least from our campus perspective, let's say 3 years ago, waste wasn't even a focus. And now looking at the challenges that that are starting to hit the campus due to state regulations and things, it's just becoming more of a focus area. And I'm imagining some of this, getting back to your question, I'm imagining that push is going to start going to the folks that are developing these products. Yeah, that was
you articulated it really well, actually. I guess the comparison I would make is that if every single person that works at, learns at, teaches at CSUN was to do the right thing, it would still be just a drop in the bucket compared to, say, Walmart or Target actually doing the right thing from the jump.
Correct. Yeah. And I do think, you know, in the next, I don't know, let's call it 10 plus years, you know, we're going to start seeing that. And I think we already have started seeing some products being shifted into more environmentally friendly packaging. And the example I always like to go back to was, you know, maybe 5 plus years ago, I feel like every computer came packaged in styrofoam. And now if you look at it, a lot of computers are coming in some sort of cardboard or card paper padded boxes. I actually was cleaning out my junk drawer the other day, and I noticed a transition in Apple. I had my old phone headphones that everyone gets, those headphones and no one uses. They used to come in a plastic box with the headphones wrapped inside. The newer phone that I got a year or two ago was wrapped it was a paper box that you unfolded and the headphones were in there. And that's, that's a very small example, but I think companies are starting to get it. So yeah, I don't really have a good answer for you how we apply pressure other than buying those products that, voting with our dollar, right? So if we don't want those products in the market, we got to stop buying them. Yeah, hopefully that answered your question.
I can elaborate on that a little bit as well. This is Nikhil Schneider speaking. I think San Jose State is a great case study of an example of this because they recently went through a new pouring rights contract with Pepsi, and they used the new the CSU's single-use plastics policy as, and held that up to Pepsi and say, hey, you're now held to this policy. And there were some pretty contentious conversations about, what does this mean? And like, how are we supposed to find something besides a plastic bottle to provide, beverage service to the campus? But, I think that's a great example of a single campus, leveraging the purchasing power of the entire CSU to push a massive company, responsible for massive amounts of plastic waste towards finding solutions and challenging them to find solutions.
Yeah.
Well, it's true though that student groups have historically played a pretty important role in applying pressure to, say, ending apartheid or divesting from countries that are doing bad things. I mean, this could be certainly another area in which that kind of pressure could be.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a really good example in the I kind of forgot about that one. But yeah, I mean, the purchasing power of the CSU, we got to remember that we're a lot bigger than Cal State Northridge, right? And I think when the CSU as a system does those policies, it may not seem like that big of a deal to have like a single-use plastics policy, but when you look at the impact the CSU can have on the entire state, it's pretty significant.
And students at San Francisco State actually prevented the university from entering a pouring rights contract. So San Francisco State doesn't have an official beverage vendor. And a large part of that is because the students pushed back against it.
Are any of these efforts highlighted, say, like on the CSU website?
That's a great question. I would like to think each campus would tout those things, but I don't know. It's definitely not on, I don't think, on the Chancellor's Office website. But you might find it on each individual campus site.
I mean, it certainly seems to be one of those items that would be, hey, we're serving the public good in this way. I would imagine that, people in the marketing department would be interested in promoting something like this.
Yeah. Any other questions out there? Feel free to unmute yourself if you can, or type it into the chat window. All right, well, if anyone else can think of any other questions, feel free. I'm gonna go ahead and paste a link into our chat window here, or maybe, let me see here if I can find it. Wanted to share this with everyone. It's the CSU, so the 23 campuses got together and started sharing their virtual Earth Month, since no campus is really on site during Earth Month. Everyone went virtual, and we came together to build out a calendar of the different events from different campuses. So that's kind of what you're seeing on my background here. But I also shared this link you want to click there, you can see all the different offerings from the CSUs, and this list will grow in the next week or so. Right now, I think there's only 5 or 6 campuses represented. So feel free to take a look at those. And if there's no other questions.
Actually, Carla had a question. I just unmuted you, Carla.
Yeah, I saw that. Hi. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, so I don't know if any consideration is going to be given to this because it's not strictly the sustainability part of it, but with the moving away from paper towels that you mentioned, and now everything that's going on now and how we need to be a little more mindful of what, high touch areas. Certain restrooms have like doorknobs versus being able to just push them away, which makes it difficult after you've washed your hands and there's no paper towels to not touch the doorknob. Is that going to be part of that greater conversation, or has that been considered at all? Do you know?
Yeah, so I'll give you, I guess, 2 answers to that question. So for existing restrooms, there's not a whole lot we can do with reformatting the restroom to make it, I guess,
Lower touch.
yeah, less touch. But there is something called a foot pull. I don't know if you've seen those before, but essentially it's like a little lever, or not lever, but it's a little like metal plate that sticks at the bottom of the door that you can use to open and close it. That's an option. There's a challenge with accessibility on that one. But yeah, that's going to be, as we move forward, I know that discussion's gonna grow, especially in light of COVID-19 and the concerns around sanitation. For new construction, we are moving away from doors, which at face value sounds interesting, but if you go to a lot of airports, right, they don't have doors on their restrooms. They're, I forget what they call them, vestibules maybe, but there's kind of like it's an entrance, but there's a wall. It's kind of a curved entrance with a wall, so you can't see in there, but you also don't have to open or close the door to get in. So that solves the touching of handle concern, and you'll likely see that in Sierra Annex, which is going to be the next building to go up.
That's cool. That's encouraging. I work in the USU, so those doors, it was funny because it came up because right before we stopped coming to campus, that was something I was thinking about. So it's like, it'd be really great not to have to touch the doorknob now that I've washed my hands, and almost all the restrooms in the USU, at least the ones that I use, have doorknobs. So
Yeah, and I know that is a big concern. Yeah, but hopefully maybe on the lighter side, hopefully maybe after this COVID-19 situation that people wash their hands.
yeah.
All right. Any other questions? If not, we'll go ahead and close out, given that we're coming close to the 1 o'clock hour. All right. Well, thank you everyone for attending. Again, check out the events across the CSU. There's definitely some interesting topics out there. So, and thank you.